Let's talk dark academia. Dark academia is a wildly popular genre at the moment, and it's one that I mostly really enjoy. But it is a bit weird to even call it a genre. It's more a style of novel that requires certain trends and tropes in order for that novel to be called dark academia. It's kind of a genre with a tick sheet, whereas most genres can be pretty broad in their exploration of that genre. Dark academia is a little bit more rigid, and for that reason, it often feels like a lot of dark academia novels borrow from each other, for better or worse. So let's explore 7 of the best dark academia novels, all of which I wholly recommend in one way or another. I'm going to start by teasing a kind of controversial statement, which is that dark academia arguably has 2 very different starting points. The first and most obvious is Donna Tartt's The Secret History. That's the dark academia novel, and it's the only one that I don't have on me. The Secret History was Donna Tartt's debut novel. She wrote it when she was about 29 years old, I think, and it shaped the course of dark academia for the rest of time, probably. In fact, most of the other books that I mention here have specific settings, tropes, characters, ideas, themes that harken back to The Secret History. And I'm going to mention that book a lot moving forward. Interestingly though, The Secret History is not my favourite dark academia novel, but it is an absolutely beautiful thing. And we must thank it for more or less starting this genre. The Secret History, if you haven't read it, is set in a small, prestigious, Ivy League-style university in rural Vermont. Our protagonist is a young, poor, working-class kid from a small town in California who manages to get into this university mostly because he really loves Greek. He reads and writes Greek, and it's become a bit of an obsession for him. And so, unsurprisingly, when he gets into this college, he makes friends with a group of kids who gather together with the Greek professor at the college, and they all just chat about Greek stuff. But apart from our protagonist, all the other kids in this group, and there's, I think, 5 others, they're all horrible people. They're all rich, stuck up, pretentious, unlikable, posh people. And everything's told from our protagonist's perspective, and at the beginning of the novel, we learn that one member of the group is going to be killed by the rest of them. And then we spend about half the novel moving towards that eventuality. We learn about these kids, we learn about what they get up to, and other than being obsessed with everything Greek and everything classics, they spend their time getting drunk, doing hallucinogenic drugs, and getting into a lot of trouble doing some really, really bad stuff, which they feel they can do because they're privileged, rich white people. Arguably the most wonderful thing about this novel is how beautifully it's written. Almost every line in The Secret History is gorgeous. In an Oscar Wilde Picture of Dorian Gray kind of a way, every line is a stunning piece of poetry. It really is magnetically written. And it's a wonderful case study in unlikable characters, spending your time as a reader locked in tight with a group of horrible people, and just watching them all unfold and collapse in on themselves. There's something very addictive and alluring in that, although it can also be kind of emotionally exhausting. And the book is pretty long, it's dense, it takes time to read. Even if you're a quick reader, you'll find that The Secret History feels like dragging your feet through mud. It's a slow burn, but in a pretty satisfying way. And everything has an enormous amount of gravity to it. The dark academia genre owes so much to the Gothic genre. In fact, I would argue, and I don't think it's controversial to say, that dark academia is effectively a subgenre of Gothic. And The Secret History is the perfect example of that. Speaking of the Gothic, I said that I had a kind of controversial statement to make about the 2 different starting points of dark academia, and that is this. I would argue that while The Secret History gave us all of the tropes that we've come to expect of the genre, possibly the origin of dark academia is my favourite novel of all time, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Now that dark academia is a thing, we can look back at Frankenstein and realise just how much it fits that bill. The fact that Frankenstein is a legendary piece of Gothic fiction means that, at the very least, the dark academia genre owes a lot to this novel. But it is dark academia. It's about a very, very unlikable, pretentious, wealthy, privileged young man who is in over his head, who goes off to university to try to do something that no one else has ever managed to do because he has an obsession with death and getting over death. And so while he's at university, he digs up a bunch of bodies in the graveyard, stitches them together, shocks them with electricity, and raises a new creature, a thing that has overcome death. The university setting, the young, privileged, arrogant, unlikable villain protagonist, and the fact that it's a gothic novel, all of this points to this being a wonderful piece of dark academia. So if you're a fan of the dark academia genre and you've never read Frankenstein, you're really in for a treat. You're also in for a treat regardless because Frankenstein's the best novel ever written. Fact. TM. And while we're talking about my favourite books, let's talk about If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio, which I read relatively recently, and it has honestly become my second favourite novel after Frankenstein. I loved this book, and it's very on the nose, the fact that this is a very secret history-esque novel. It owes a lot to the secret history. It is set in modern-day USA in a small rural university that specializes in theater and drama, creating potentially revolutionary and award-winning actors. And our protagonists are a group of privileged young people who are all doing the same course, who are all obsessed with a specific thing, rather than it being the Greeks and the classics. It's Shakespeare. And just like The Secret History, this book is also about a murder, but unlike The Secret History, there is a murder mystery aspect to it. In The Secret History, you know one of the characters will die, you know how the death happens, and you know who killed him. In this, it's different. You've got a group of people who are very close to each other, who are all studying Shakespeare, putting on plays, obsessing over Shakespeare, and at some point, one of them is going to die. His body is found in the middle of the night after a party starts to wind down and everybody's drunk and angry at each other, and one of them must have done it. The murder mystery also takes a fun kind of back seat as we just continue on with the main narrative, which is these characters putting on Shakespeare plays in preparation for graduation and then going off into the world and doing great things for theatre, presumably. But there's also a framing device, which is that our protagonist, Oliver, is telling this entire story after he gets out of jail. He spent 10 years in prison for the murder of the boy whose body we find, and he didn't do it. Someone else did. So this is a book that takes a lot of inspiration from The Secret History in terms of its dark academia tone and setting and character archetypes, but it's also a murder mystery, and it's also a dedication to Shakespeare. The characters are constantly spouting off Shakespeare. They're in a conversation with each other, and one of them will find a way to pull from the back of their mind a quote from a Shakespeare play that fits the conversation they're having. And we also see them rehearsing and putting on Shakespeare plays. Macbeth, Julius Caesar, King Lear, and those are my favourites, which was great for me. This is absolutely a masterpiece. I will not deny the fact that it owes so much to The Secret History, but this is my favourite of the modern dark academia genre, and it is also my second favourite book after Frankenstein. Next is Bunny by Mona Awad. This is a book that a lot of people love and a lot of people hate. I understand the hate, but I loved this book. Bunny is once again a book that owes a lot to The Secret History. The fact that it's called Bunny, and Bunny is a phrase that characters call each other, harkens back to the character of Bunny in The Secret History. Our protagonist Samantha also has the middle name Heather, which I think is a reference to the film Heathers, because this book is a lot like Heathers. If you've seen the film Heathers, or the new musical stage adaptation, which I haven't seen yet, and you enjoyed it, you're gonna like Bunny. Bunny is The Secret History meets Heathers. Our protagonist, Samantha, is an angry, grumpy young girl who goes to a small university in Warren, Vermont, same state that The Secret History is set in. She's doing a creative writing course, and it's a really, really small class, and all the other girls in the class are spoiled, privileged, pretty secretive girls who all call each other Bunny. They're very plastic, and Samantha is very alternative, and she hasn't got time for them. But one day, they invite her to a party. She goes out of curiosity, and it turns out that they are a cult of sorts. And the cult-like behavior that they get up to might actually be kind of supernatural. There is a fairy tale horror sensibility to this book. In a lot of ways, it's satirical. It pokes fun at cliquey behavior and the people who think they're too good for that behavior. But it's also pretty frightening and strange. There's an incredible amount of surrealism, and there are moments that just feel like fever dreams. Bunny is definitely not for everyone, but I adored it. This is Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. Leigh Bardugo is a pretty famous author of YA fantasy fiction, and this was her first adult novel, inspired by her time at Yale University. There is now a sequel called Hellbent, which is a great name, and I haven't read it yet, because I actually wanted to reread this before I read that one, because I have to admit right now, I don't remember a lot of this book. I need to read it again. I enjoyed it at the time, but now that I'm a much bigger fan of dark academia, since reading Bunny and If We Were Villains, I now want to go back to this and give it another read. I think I'm going to enjoy it even more the second time round. This book is inspired by the concept that a lot of universities have secret societies of usually wealthy and privileged people. Our protagonist, much like in The Secret History, is a poor, unassuming young person from a small town in California. Galaxy, or Alex, was the daughter of a bunch of hippies, and she ended up getting into Yale, and the book begins, as far as I remember, in a very bombastic way, which is Alex knee-deep in a cult that she has joined, and this cult is real, and it helps monitor ghosts and the dead, and there's necromancy involved. I have to admit, I really don't remember it that well, but that's Galaxy's kind of job within this cult. She has the ability to see ghosts for real. And so she's put in charge of monitoring this necromantic cult behavior by keeping an eye on any of the ghosts that might pose a threat and actually be physically dangerous. And her ability to see ghosts is obviously quite unusual. It doesn't happen to everyone, and it's not the case for everyone in the cult. That's all I really remember, but I'm getting myself really excited to read this again, so I think I'm going to reread it really soon. Here's a book that kind of toes that line between murder mystery and dark academia. Now, when you look at The Secret History, and If We Were Villains, and actually Frankenstein, murder is a huge aspect of dark academia. If We Were Villains actually leans into the murder mystery side of death and killing as part of a narrative. And this is the same. The Maidens by Alex Michaelides could be seen as a piece of dark academia with murder mystery elements, or a murder mystery novel in a dark academia setting. It's set in Cambridge, and I used to live in Cambridge, so I really like that. And our protagonist is a therapist named Mariana. She went to Cambridge University, and right now her niece is at Cambridge, and calls Mariana up to say that a friend of hers has died. And Mariana goes up to Cambridge to see what's going on. She decides to do an investigation. She kind of takes it into her own hands to do that. The book depicts the police as aggressive idiots, which I love. And the prime suspect is made very clear up front, which is a professor who has his own secret club of elite students who, like in The Secret History, are all obsessed with Greek tragedies, traditional Greek classic tales, and Mariana's niece is worried about what will happen next. So Mariana is keeping a close eye on this professor, wondering if he did it or one of his students did it, and a string of murders starts to unfold. So this is very much a murder mystery book, but with an intensely dark academia setting and tone. And once again, it owes a lot to The Secret History. And finally, we have The Cloisters, which at the time of making this video is the newest book on this list. The Cloisters is absolutely wonderful, and it's a great example of how the genre is starting to shift and evolve and change and explore different avenues. Because this is not set at a university or in a university town or in a rural area. It's set at a museum in New York City called The Cloisters, which is kind of an offshoot of the Met. But in true dark academia fashion, our protagonist is from a nowhere town in Washington state. She was supposed to do a summer internship at the Met, but that internship disappeared the day that she arrived. And so a guy who runs the Cloisters happens to be in the meeting and says, "Hey, I'll take you. Come work at the Cloisters for the summer." And so she does. She jumps at the chance. And there's only a few people who work at this museum. And what makes those people interesting is an obsession with tarot cards, something that I have recently gotten into. There is a mystery involving a tarot deck that slowly unfolds throughout the novel, and we spend a lot of time just following our protagonist Anne as she gets to know the museum, gets to know how it works, gets to know the people that run it, their relationships to each other, their personalities, their histories, and the fact that they are really obsessed with tarot cards. The history of them, the power of them, and what they're hoping to learn more about and unveil as the story goes on. The Cloisters by Katie Hayes shows us that dark academia does not have to be limited to a posh fancy university like Cambridge or Yale. You can still explore the darker side of academia in a different capacity. And actually, I think that's really, really great. There's so much more fun to be had when you look at academia in that way, rather than it just be a bunch of spoiled rich kids at college doing naughty things. Let's make the academia side of dark academia a greater focus, just like the Cloisters does. The idea that you've got a museum curator who's an academic and obsessed with learning more about the mystery, intrigue, and history behind tarot cards, yeah, that really sold me. Because that is dark academia. Not just what the genre has come to mean, which is, as I said, posh kids doing naughty things, which I don't always want or love. I think that this book might show us what dark academia is going to become. This is the first step on a new journey out of the bounds that the secret history wrapped the genre up in, without Donatart meaning to, obviously. But this is a step in the right direction. It's great. So there you go. Those were 7 dark academia novels that I recommend. You're not going to like all of them. They all have good bits and bad bits, but I like them all for different reasons. And obviously, if I can only recommend 2, it's going to be my 2 favourite novels ever, Frankenstein and If We Were Villains. So go check those 2 out at the very least, if you haven't already. And subscribe for books.